very excited to welcome you here.
Hi, thanks, Betty. Appreciate it. As you said, I'm Jonathan Kingston, and I'm a contributing photographer at National Geographic. I certainly didn't start there. I started way back in the late 90s as a kid growing up in Virginia and moved to the West Coast and got into photography and kind of went from there. But what I do is a lot of travel photography. I do maritime archaeology and documentary work. So that's my wheelhouse.
That's very, very cool. How did you get started? Like you talked about getting interested. Was there a particular event in your life where you went, "Ooh, this is kind of interesting. Maybe I could make my living doing this"?
100%. Long story short, in high school, I was never very good at anything. I didn't do well in math. I did okay in writing, but nothing ever clicked. I was kind of a bad student. And I think it was my junior year, I was able to enroll in a vocational photography program at the high school. And that was the first time I'd ever done anything that I felt like I had sort of an innate talent for, an innate ability for. And I came home from high school one day and I said, "Dad, I've got it all figured out. I want to be a professional photographer. So I gotta make a picture of my father for you. He's British. He's a very well-known, internationally well-known scientist, organic chemist, bow tie, tweed jacket." And he just says, "Oh, Jonathan, that's not a good idea." But it it really was the first thing I felt truly convicted about. And so that was the moment for me. And we sort of went back and forth over the dinner table many times. And eventually he saw my passion for it. He saw that I wasn't going to let it go. And he said, "Okay, look, just go get a degree in anything other than photography. And if you still want to do it after that, you have my blessing." And that's kind of how it all started. I went to university, I studied communications. And then after that, I went on to pursue photography. I moved out to California and actually entered a photo school at that point in Santa Barbara. So
Nice.
that was the beginning of it.
Excellent. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very funny. I saw something the other day about a creative person with two very professional, like scientists, parents, and the back and forth that had to happen in order to be able to pursue the creative career. And like you,
Yeah.
it was okay, just get a degree in something, complete,
Yeah.
and then if that doesn't interest you, then ultimately you have a degree to fall back on. Go ahead and
Yeah.
be creative and see how that goes.
And I totally get it. I mean, I'm a parent now, right? And so I get where he was coming from. I didn't when I was in high school. I just said, "Oh, Dad, you're trying to crush my dreams." But now I get it. He wanted to make sure I had food on the table, and it was great advice because the people that I met at that school are ultimately the people that connected me with National Geographic. It wasn't the people at photo school; it was the people I met at university on that first go around. So it's he had some wise advice, and I'm glad I listened to him.
So, have you always been interested in nature and underwater photography, or is that something that just you transitioned to over time?
Yeah, that's a great question. The underwater photography thing actually happened as I was finishing up the first university, and I was looking at this catalog for the photographic school. I said, "Wow, they offer a course in underwater photography. That sounds like the coolest course on the planet." I'd never been a scuba diver. I grew up in the mountains of Virginia, but when I moved to California and enrolled in the school and took that class, it was again one of those epiphanous moments. I learned how to scuba dive. I got in the water. There's just something so incredible about being in that realm, being weightless. It's like I think every great science fiction writer is probably an underwater diver as well, and just seeing this whole other planet, and that really resonated with me, and that's kind of what started that. And coming out of that and coming into the professional world, what was really nice is there's not a lot of people doing underwater photography. There's some, but an almost an instant specialty that I could say, hey, I have this
Mhm.
skill, and that made it a differentiator that would make people more curious and interesting to hire me. And that's actually how I got into some of the archaeology stuff. Is on various projects, people needed someone that could dive down and photograph some of these finds that they were finding, and so it all kind of snowballed that way.
Excellent. So what are some of the challenges that you faced early on in your career? I mean, it being a specialty, was the demand as high, or was that something that you had to overcome?
Um, yeah, so for me in the editorial documentary world, it's the biggest challenge that was a challenge then and is still a challenge now. Is it's a real peaks and valleys experience. I'll get an assignment, I'll be out on assignment, I'll be on the top of the world. I'll be on the summit of Mount Everest, figuratively speaking, just loving every second of it. Coming back, turning in, the take to the editor, I see it in print. That's wonderful. And then there's this long valley that happens between these assignments where I don't know if another one's coming. I don't know if the money's going to last between them. And so early on, that was very tough psychologically. I've gotten better with dealing with that now, and I think a big part of that is not totally defining myself as a photographer, finding other things to do in my life. A big part of that's becoming a parent, and having my daughter to take care of, and it lets me take myself less seriously than I used to. But another part of dealing with that is sometimes those valleys are a couple, 2, 3, 4 months long, and so I had to find other ways to generate income between assignments. And that came down to teaching photographic workshops and leading tours for National Geographic. They do these wonderful photo expeditions all over the world. And I got hooked up with some great people that organize that. And so that's helped me to have things on the calendar that I know I have guaranteed income coming, and I know I can make it through those valleys financially. And that's how I sort of carry on in the business.
Often with creative souls, of which I am one. I'm not a good photographer, but I'm still a creative soul. Having a variety of interests and applications
Mhm.
also helps keep me fresh.
Yes.
Also leads to way too many browsers open, but
Well, playing music, rock climbing, there's all sorts of things that when I'm in those valleys, I can turn to, and just it gives me that creative juice again, and it gives me that excitement to carry on. And
the photography industry is constantly changing, and I think the
Mhm.
last 5 to 7 years has been massive changes.
Yeah,
How do you keep evolving and staying relevant, and how have those changes impacted you and your business?
yeah. No, that I mean, it's the photography industry is a tough industry. That's the Cliff's Notes. Anyone entering it needs to know that. I can only speak for myself, but staying curious is the short answer. I find that if I can keep curious about something, about a topic, about interest, that many times people are interested in that same thing. And sometimes that curiosity is technical. Hey, maybe there's a cool new technique that's come out and I'm going to practice that technique. Sometimes it's a story idea and I get really curious about that and I research and I go down the wormhole and then I pitch the idea. Um, Sometimes it's just how can I communicate things I've done in the past better? How can I be curious about that and share that curiosity with a greater audience? But that's the long and the short of it for me is just staying curious.
How has social media impacted your career? It's changed the
Mm.
world quite dramatically. Um, from a career point of view, how has it impacted you?
You know, I'm going to back up and zoom out a little bit on that question. So I think it was 2002 that I built my first website to to advertise myself. It was kind of early days, and I thought, this is great. I'm out on the web. I'm going to get discovered. My work's up there. This is wonderful. I think even early on, there was a brief window, like in 2005, 2006. If you Googled underwater photographer, I would come up above David Duboulet, which was really very cool. I'll probably never be as good as him, but that was a very cool thing to see in Google search results. The website never did. I mean, it acted as a business card for me. It had credibility, but it never did what I thought it was going to do. When fast forwarding to social media, specifically to Instagram, because that's really the main one that I'm on, that did what I thought the website was going to do. That gave me the reach, that gave me the discovery, that got me in front of editors that I probably wouldn't get in front of before. That got me in front of art buyers that probably wouldn't have seen my work any other way. And so it really had that sticky factor. It really has made a difference in my career. And I won't lie, it's a pain in the butt. And it's also one of those, emotional roller coasters. It's well documented that they use game theory to influence how your posts are received, and some do great and some don't, and there's no rhyme or reason to it. But I keep doing it because it's that one thing that is sticky, and it's that one thing that is effective at getting my work out there and getting it seen by the people that might hire me or might purchase my work. So
Are there any particular strategies with social media, particularly Instagram, that you use, that you find are more helpful in getting greater visibility for the purchasers? Obviously, I mean, there's the difference between the people who are actually going to purchase and the people who are just going, wow, that's incredible. I can't believe he does that.
Right. I'm certainly not an expert at it. I think that the thing that I struggle with most is consistency on it. I'll go through sort of these highs and low phases where I'm posting very regularly, and then I don't post for a long time, and then I start posting regularly again. And I think that what I've seen is when I'm a little more consistent with it, that seems to be when there's a momentum starts happening. But it seems like just the algorithms are changing all the time, how things are getting discovered. I think recently, as most recently as maybe a few months ago, they really stopped looking at hashtags as ways to discover, and now they're using other tools, AI image discovery, things like that. So it's a real moving target.
So the industry has changed, and more people are walking around with cameras in their phones and those types of things. Obviously, the industry has changed a little bit because of those capabilities, and everybody with a phone now thinks they're a professional photographer. What advice would you give to a photographer starting out, just trying to decide whether this is a career for them? And once they've made that decision, what advice would you share based on your experience?
Boy, I mean, I can only speak to what's worked for me, and what's worked for me is having multiple income streams, right? Talking about the highs and lows earlier, obviously putting myself out there, getting the assignments, but then knowing that the assignments might be a few months apart. So finding a way to normalize that income stream. One thing that I sometimes do, if I have a big, really profitable assignment, if we're talking 10,000, 15,000 plus for the assignment, after that, I'll take that money, put it in a savings account, and then pay myself like I'm getting a monthly wage for a couple months. And so it's not all going out the door at once, because it's really easy to get a big chunk of money and then just spend it all on a new piece of kit. Sure. And I try not to do that anymore, even though I'm really tempted to, because I love toys. but more looking at it as, okay, this is I'm going to get a monthly salary of 2,000, 3,000. I'm going to make my budget work for that. And then that kind of helps normalize that income stream over 3 or 4 months, which I've found to be very, very helpful. But just having, again, for me, having those multiple income streams has been absolutely key. And I think that's what I would tell anyone who's starting the profession now is, it's great. It's a great profession. It's very exciting, but it's very challenging. And there's going to be long periods where you're out of work, most likely. So find those revenue streams.
We had a chance to talk with Todd Bigelow, who you may be business of photography,
Yeah.
and also a very long time Craddock user, and also going to be a beta tester for us. And one of the things he talked about was licensing, and going back and doing license reminders for people when things are going to expire. Is that something that you work on as well, or?
Yeah. Yeah, that's very helpful. And actually talking about the phone and talking about licensing, I just got a relicense for a book cover, HarperCollins book cover, that I took on an iPhone. So it all comes together. A good picture is a good picture. It doesn't matter what device it was taken on. If it tells the story, that's effective and it works for the client. But having those, I think I've had 3 or 4 relicenses come in this week, and that's very important to stay on top of that. Absolutely. And that's where having your piece of software is so critical to track that, because I don't know any other way I'd be able to keep track of what's out there. And even when someone comes in and says, hey, this is time for a relicense, even how to charge for it. If I didn't have that piece of software, I wouldn't know how to price it. So it's really, really essential for that side of the business.
Perfect. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why Craddock initially, because he's a photographer himself, he went, we've got to figure out, because it is feast and famine.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other topics you'd like to touch on, or anything else you'd like to add to the conversation?
I mean, I think what you were kind of touching on with the phones, photography's never been more popular than it is today. I think as a society, we've never been more visually literate than we are today. And I was reading on a blog post, I think it was on Photo Shelter yesterday, but someone said, hey, it's kind of like being as a photographer, you're on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange trying to make trades. You're in this chaotic, you're trying to break through the noise of the crowd to sell your image. And I think you can't forget that photography for the end buyer is a commodity these days. And so you really got to treat it like a business. Learn as much about selling and business as you can, along with mastering photo skills. Being a great photographer is a great thing, but I know a lot of great photographers that aren't great business people, and they're out of business. So it's two halves of the same coin. I think that's, for me, a important thing. And I'm not saying I'm a great businessman. I've somehow managed to survive in this crazy business. That's all I can say. Survival is success, but I wouldn't do it any other way. It's been a great career.